Hello, welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We're your hosts, Tori.
And Holland.
Two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today we are reviewing the album Riot by Paramore, and we'll be ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10 with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. So feel free to agree, disagree, or learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly because there are spoilers ahead. As many spoilers as you can have in an album. Cut to the intro. Alright, welcome to the Lion's Den. For our new listeners, we'll be breaking down the scoring system by category as we go, but the full breakdown is also available on our socials and website. So let's get started. So I chose Riot by Paramore for us to review. This is very familiar to us both. Paramore is my favorite band of all time. And
You're already getting emotional here. You're like, they're my favorite.
They are my favorite. I've seen them 3 times live in concert. All 3 of those times with you, actually.
They were, yeah.
Yeah. So this is an album from 2007. It was released June 12th, 2007 by Fueled by Ramen. That's a very long time ago now. There are 11 tracks in the main album, and there are 5 bonus tracks depending on which version or release you purchased. So like if you went and got your album from Hot Topic, it had 1 bonus track, but if you went and bought it from FYE, do you remember FYE?
I do remember FYE.
It had a different one. So there are 5 bonus tracks that you could have gotten from wherever.
Man, FYE closed down a while ago, didn't it? Man, old school.
This album had 4 singles that came out of it, and there's no specific title track. Misery Business is the most popular song from the album, though, so if you have never heard the album, you've probably at least heard Misery Business. The band members at time of release of this album were Haley Williams on vocals, Josh Farrow on the guitar, Jeremy Davis on the bass, and Zach Farrow on the drums. This album was certified double platinum in multiple countries. I took this little snippet from the Paramore wiki. The album was called Riot because, as Haley explained, the word to them literally means an unbridled outburst of emotions. When we were writing, it seemed like our thoughts and emotions were coming out so fast we couldn't control them. It felt like there was a riot within us. So the album takes our passion to a new level. It's all just raw energy. And with that, we'll jump into the first category.
All right. Well, so I thought this would be kind of fun. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I thought it'd be fun to kind of list who, according to Billboard, who the top 10 artists of 2007 were that year, just to kind of compare the other artists that were kind of charting at that time.
Is that what you were Googling over there?
Yeah, I also looked at this when I was kind of analyzing my my categories. So the number 1 artist of 2007 was Akon. So number 2 was Fergie. 3 Justin Timberlake. 4 Daughtry. 5 Carrie Underwood. 6 Beyonce. 7 Nickelback. 8 Avril Lavigne. 9 T-Pain, and 10 was Gwen Stefani.
So Paramore didn't even chart. Well, it wasn't in the top 10 artists for that year.
Right. They actually are not on... Well, hold on. Let me not shoot myself in the foot. They did not chart at all in the top 50 artists of 2007.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Because of how popular Misery Business was, but maybe Misery Business found its popularity later.
I don't think Misery Business charted very high or stayed on the charts for very long at all in 2007.
Wow. Okay.
Is considered the band's breakthrough hit, and it peaked on the Billboard Hot 100 at number 26 for the week of January 12th, 2008.
Oh, so that was 6 months after the album was released.
Right. So at release, it really didn't chart at all. The chart performance really wasn't successful. It had a lot of digital downloads. It was really successful. But it was the band's highest charting single at the time. prior to the release of Ain't It Fun in 2014.
Okay.
It still remains the band's most played song on the radio to date, whereas Ain't It Fun never succeeded on alternative radio due to the band's change in style.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, the shift in their sound was about that time, so.
It actually peaked at number 3 on the Hot Modern Rock Tracks chart. So it performed very well in, other forms of radio, but mainstream, those were the top artists of 2007. Paramore wasn't even really on the radar. I thought it was interesting though that Avril Lavigne was number 8 for that year.
Yeah.
And a lot of people make
very,
that comparison.
Overlapping styles, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, getting started into the categories. So first category for music is lyrics/writing. So we have a total possible 2 points for lyrics and writing of the song. I gave it 1.5 out of 2 points. One thing I think has to be credited for Paramore, especially with this album, is all of the songs were written by Hayley Williams and Josh Farro, except for That's What You Get, which was written by Haley, Josh, and Taylor York. And When It Rains was written by Haley, Josh, and Zach Farro as well. So for non-Paramore fans, Taylor York did join the band later. He performed with them touring prior to joining the band, and he is currently in Paramore right now. Yeah. So really all of the songs, the lyrics of the songs were written by essentially Paramore's band members. So I think you really got to give them credit. A lot of bands don't have that, aren't able to say that.
I think that there are a lot of really popular artists that are not self-producing, and I think there's always merit in popular artists that do self-produce, because then it's like you almost feel so much prouder of their success because you know that they got there of like their own work.
Yeah. And I didn't use that information to give or remove points because I think I wanted to just discuss the quality of the lyrics that were written. Some notes I have: the song When It Rains on the album, lyrically, it's extremely poetic. Like, it's a very poetic song. It's pretty deep, which is surprising. It still fits the sound of the band though, like the feel of the band. The, other thing I think it's interesting to notice is a lot of the songs on this album are very catchy and they don't use that typical pop rhyming scheme. I checked the song Let the Flames Begin. The first verse is extremely well written. It does not rhyme at all. There is no rhyming scheme to that song. So it's the lyrics of that song give it this kind of catchy, not catchy and like bubblegum pop, but it is, the lyrics are easy to flow. They flow naturally when you're singing along. They flow naturally listening to them, and they don't have this typical rhyming scheme in doing so.
You said in Let the Flames Begin?
Yeah.
I think probably the only real rhyme in the beginning is what a shame, we all remain, which is still only kind of a half rhyme.
Right.
So. And
it doesn't necessarily rhyme with the verse following it.
Correct.
It doesn't have the A-B structure of the verse. The other thing I noted is that these songs really are lyrically intelligent. When I looked it up, when Paramore was, at the most, when this album debuted, Hayley Williams, who's kind of the primary songwriter, when this song was released, she was 18.
Wow.
So when she was writing the music for this album, she was younger, So the lyrics of the song resonate really well with teenagers. It's that punk kind of angsty teen vibe, but it's extremely intelligent. It's not just like, I hate you, mom, like these middle school, angsty teens. It's lyrically written very intelligent, kind of going back to that example of When It Rains. Like, the words of the songs, they flow very intelligently. Lyrically as an album, it's written by teenagers in a way that's exactly what a teenager wants to listen to, but it's about more than what an adult would think a teenager wants to hear in a song and in an album. And I think overall it's kind of tough to like talk about the lyrics without like pinpointing every single song that's on the album. So I tried to kind of cover the broad concept of the lyrics of the album as a whole. The reason that I kind of gave it 1.5 out of 2 points is, and I think you could go either way. You wouldn't necessarily take off points for this, but there's some songs on this album that I have heard. I've listened to this album well over 100 times.
Right.
And there are some songs I still have no idea what they're talking about.
Really?
Yeah. Like
Example?
And perhaps like I had to, of course, I haven't, reviewing this album was the first time that I really looked up a lot of the lyrics. So going just on audibly hearing the songs over and over and over again, I know the words to the songs, but I've never thought about what they're singing about. Like, for example, Crush, Crush, Crush. Like, that song is a great song. It's super catchy. It's fun to sing. Like, it's a great song, but I had to look up the lyrics and, like, read them as if I was reading a book to figure out, like, oh, that's what they're singing about. Like, so I think that sometimes and it's not necessarily a negative thing, but I think that overall the pros of it being a very intelligently written lyrics also sometimes get confusing with, like, I don't really know what they're talking about. Like, are they talking about, like,
So I'm just trying to understand what you're saying, because I think I'm having a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
So are you saying that, like, you didn't know the words she was saying, like you couldn't understand her, or like because it was musical, it wasn't clicking in your head in a proper narrative?
Yeah. So, like, because I know what the words are that she's saying, I can sing along to every one of these songs. But if you asked me, what is this song about? I don't know. I have no idea. You know?
See.
And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. And I think it fits this genre of music very well. But sometimes I think that lyrically your songs are written very well, but then the purpose of a song is to convey a message to an audience. Okay. And so if you've listened to a song 100 times and someone could ask you, what is this song about? And you would say, oh, I have no idea. I have no idea what the song's about. Like, at all. Then, you know, something about A Quiet Evening Alone. Something about that. Like, I don't know. And, you know, but otherwise I have no idea what the song's about. Then I think that, in a way, you're not conveying the message of the song to your audience. If they can't tell you the song is about, you know, falling in love with somebody, or the song's about we're a band and we're sticking together, you know, and I think a lot of those messages of the songs are very clear. You know, Misery Business, everybody knows what that song's about. Mm-hmm. That, you know, you could tell anybody that's familiar with that song could say, I know exactly what the song is singing about. But there are other songs on the album that I think are
more vague.
And I don't think that's a discredit to the, you know, lyrical intelligence of the artist that wrote it. But I think in a way, I kind of deducted half a point because I think that there is a message to this song and it's not as clearly conveyed as some of the other messages of the other songs.
Okay.
So 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. Me. Sounds good. So for me, in lyrics and writing, I also gave it 1.5 points out of 2. I think that the sound and the mood are very indicative of the time, that sort of mid to late 2000s. Yet, I think, unlike a lot of artists' popular songs from that time, this album has aged impeccably. And you can still listen to it in 2022, and you still get the same amount of enjoyment out of it, and it doesn't feel dated. The sound is clearly that era, but it doesn't feel stale like I think a lot of artists from that time, those songs do now. And maybe that's partly personal preference, because I do love pop punk as a genre and have for a very long time, and I am biased toward Paramore since they are my favorite band. But just re-listening to it now, there was a time when I was like, you know, no, Riot's not my favorite album, but re-listening to it, I've kind of realized like how important and valuable that album is to me. And I think that part of that is because it is such an old album at this point, and yet it still resonates so well. I think that there are certain songs that we didn't get a music video for, and yet they still paint these absolutely like wonderful mind pictures just lyrically. Let the Flames Begin is my pick for that. So it's funny that you use that as an example for a completely different point, and I use it for an example for something different. I think that if you listen to that song, you can almost picture a music video that doesn't exist. I think that the ending of the album, as using Born for This as the ending of the album, it's a very good choice. It's very anthem-y, and it kind of leaves you with this feeling of like satisfaction. Even if you just listen to the song by itself, the song ends with sort of this emotion of satisfaction. So I think putting it at the end of the album is a very smart idea, because then you feel like you've gone through this whole, musical journey, and you leave with this feeling of satisfaction, that sort of anthem-y sort of resolution, I suppose, that kind of comes with that song, I think is a very good choice. Maybe that would flow into, maybe that kind of would dip into another category later on. But I think that I wanted to point it out because it's the lyrics that make it an anthem, not so much the music. And I really like the call and response in that song. I think it's so fun to sing with your friends in the car.
Yeah. I think lyrically that song the call and response in that is great. And I like that it's that lyrical aspect is not overused in the rest of the album.
Mm-hmm. Now, the reason that I took a half a point away is for these 2 points. I do think that overall the album lacks in variety. I think it does the same thing very well, and there is a little bit of variety. You're not listening to the same song 11 times, but I think there could be a bit more experimentation that happens in the album that I think they do better in later albums, but it's kind of, there's a lot of like sameness, and I think that doesn't have to necessarily be a negative, because it does mean that like lyrically you do sort of get like this feeling that everything goes, everything kind of matches each other. So I think it's not necessarily a negative, but I do wish there was just a little bit more differentiation between tracks. I think the weakest point on this album lyrically is the song Miracle. That's just my personal opinion. I think it feels slightly less creative than the rest of the songs lyrically. I just read lyrics while I was listening, and I just think that it's a little bit slightly cliche.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think my alternative perspective to that is I think that the message of Miracle is so good.
And I'm not disagreeing with your point. And I don't disagree with you about the point that the message of Miracle is phenomenal, because it is. But I think that as far as we've seen in the other tracks how poetic they can get their message across, and I think there's a lack of that in the track Miracle, and so it feels it's almost mainstream. I think that song feels almost mainstream, and the rest of the album does not. And I think that's not musically, but I'm talking like lyrically, it feels like it just fits kind of like your expected structure for a song more than the other songs do.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair point.
Yeah. My tag on note here is that my favorite of all of the bonus songs. Did you listen to the bonus songs?
I did.
Okay.
I touch on the bonus songs in creativity.
Okay. So my favorite bonus song lyrically is Decoy. I think it fits the rest of the album better than all the other bonus songs do.
I agree. Yeah. I can go ahead and mention it. The bonus tracks held no weight in my scoring system.
Yeah, same with me. They didn't change my my scoring of anything. Mm-hmm. I just sometimes have a couple notes about them just for fun.
Sure.
So that's my score for lyrics and writing, 1.2. Well, I'm sorry. My score for lyrics and writing is 1.5 out of 2.
One thing before we move on to the next category, I think what I realized in listening to this album, first of all, I think listening to this album to review it was one of the most fun things that we have done to review. I really enjoyed that whole process. But one thing I noticed when I was listening to Let the Flames Begin, I had this epiphany moment. You probably already have because you're, super fan. But I listened to Let the Flames Begin, and I had to like almost stop halfway through just listening to it lyrically. And then I pulled up part 2. And I was like,
sequel.
Oh my gosh.
You never knew
the
that?
sequel. I didn't.
Oh my gosh, part 2 is part 2 of Let the Flames Begin. That's why part 2 is one of my favorite overall Paramore tracks ever.
And spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to Paramore's self-titled album, part 2 is a track on there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was just, I feel like I entered the metaverse or something like with this album. But I, just like the instrumentation of it and the lyrics were just so good. So I was like, I wanted to bring that up because I was like, I'm sure Tori knew this, but I was like, did you know?
I'm so surprised that you didn't realize that before now.
No, and really, I think this is the first time that I've listened to Riot from start to finish as intended. Most of the time when I listen to music, I listen to it on shuffle. So really, and we cover album flow later on in our scoring system, but yeah. So next category, however, is singing and vocal ability. So this is where we kind of discuss the vocal ability of the band. So if there are, lead singers, background singers, the use of auto-tune, how they enunciate, use of harmony, how they sing, their vocal style, things like that. So out of 2 possible points, I gave this album 2 out of 2. One of the things, the kind of the buzzwords we consider when we rank this is distinction. So, does Hayley Williams is the lead singer of this band. Does she have a distinct sound? And I was trying to play the devil's advocate here because, the whatever number 8 artist in 2007 was Avril Lavigne. And I think a lot of people make that comparison that Hayley Williams is just riding on the coattails of Avril Lavigne. Because Avril Lavigne kind of brought that teenage, kind of like punk,
she brought a lot of exposure to that kind of sound.
Yeah. A female singer who is, kind of this skater, grunge, coming out of the 90s into the 2000s. And some people could look at that and say, well, Hayley Williams just rode on Avril Lavigne's coattails and she's kind of a copycat artist. And I wanted to make the point of bringing that up because I very much so disagree. Avril Lavigne's sound is very different from Paramore's sound. Her style as a vocalist is very different from Hayley Williams' style as a vocalist. Avril Lavigne really is more of a bubblegum punk pop.
Yeah.
Whereas this album of Paramore's is really more of that punk sound. So I just wanted to make a point. I don't think that's a fair comparison. So I would say that I believe Hayley Williams does have a very distinct style as a lead singer. I think she pulls off that teen angst and punk sound while she maintains extremely talented vocal control and clarity. There are some times where I think if you're not used to this genre, she sounds like she's kind of screaming. Her range is phenomenal as a singer, and so when she hits that higher register of her range, it does kind of grate on the ears if you're not used to hearing that sound. But I don't think that's a discredit to her talent as a singer, nor is it a discredit to the quality of her voice and the songs that she's singing. Again, I'd like to point out when this album was released, she was 18 years old. So in the production of this album, she was younger. She has a phenomenal voice for a teenager. And this is the second album that Paramore released. So this is her second go round at producing an album. And I think this is one of the defining albums of Paramore where, Hayley Williams really shines in this album. I think that it kind of set a precedent that you can have a female lead vocalist for a band. At the time, that really wasn't popular.
Especially not in pop punk. I think really only Avril Lavigne was probably the only other notable one at the time.
Right. You know, most female artists were solo artists and they had a band play behind them. Avril Lavigne's a kind of an example of that. She's not a band. She is Avril Lavigne. You know, I think especially in this genre, proving that a female vocalist can lead a band. That kind of punk sound, even in a song like Hallelujah, which, you know, her range is great in that song. It's extremely clear when she hits those notes. Of course, Misery Business is, you know, especially on verse 2, where she says, looking as innocent as possible to get to who they want and what they like. It's easy if you do it right. Well, I refuse, I refuse, I refuse. Every single syllable is clear.
Yeah.
You know, it would be so easy for, you know, a less seasoned singer or a less talented artist or just, you know, a different group to just blur all of those words together.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, but when you listen to that song, you can hear every word that she's saying. And then also the backing vocals, I feel like don't get enough love in this album. Josh Farrow.
I have a note about that too.
Yeah. Josh Farrow sings backing vocals, especially in That's What You Get and Born for This. Yeah, you're going to cover it.
We have the same notes, I guess.
Yeah, so I think that the backing vocals really do a great job of blending without overshadowing, and yet it's almost like it's that factor of if they were bad, you would pay attention to it, but because they're done so well, you don't even notice that they're there sometimes. Yeah. So it just fills out that sound and makes it good. Kind of fills in the body of the vocals on this album. So 2 out of 2 points for me. I don't have a ton of notes on that, but
okay. So I also gave it 2 out of 2 points. Hayley Williams is a legend. I think that she does set the bar for the genre and for female like band fronts. Like you said, there's not many of them, but I think she sets the bar so high. It's very difficult, I think, for people in that genre to now not be compared to the strength that Hayley Williams brings vocally.
Right.
Even male pop punk bands who have male singers, I think it's probably difficult to not compare them often to how well she can just pull off basically anything. I think for a lot of singers in the genre of pop punk, they have one style, and I think Hayley is more diverse than that. I think she can pull off their ballads and their edgier, rockier songs with the same amount of skill and talent and interesting sort of ear sound. Like, it's very pleasing to hear her try all these different things.
Right.
And I think there's not many other singers in the genre that can pull it off quite as well as she can. So I love Hayley Williams and I admire her. And
you're a stan.
I'm a Hayley Williams stan. I really am. Her vocal range and consistency has been impressive since their first album and stays consistent even to this day.
That's very true.
I think even though Paramore's sound has shifted a lot through the years, and I think that's fine. They're making the music that they want to make, and I like it anyway, so it's a win-win. But I think from All We Know Is Falling to After Laughter and her solo stuff, which I'm not as big of a fan of her solo stuff, but I think her vocal ability is still so consistent. She maybe has tried new things since the beginning of her career, which is to be expected, but the skill level is still evident from the beginning. I said, harmonies are often Hayley with herself, but I prefer when it's Josh that's harmonizing. A la That's What You Get. That was my note said. So, and then of course in Born for This, you've got that sort of call and response, which I mentioned earlier, and that response is all of the guys actually, which I think is really satisfying. But my biggest example for, I think, Hayley's ability in this album is the track We Are Broken. I know it's not one of your favorite tracks, but I love it for what she does in that song. Her tone is so clear, and she hits every note so unwaveringly. There's no sliding to the note. There's no she doesn't use a lot of warble, or she's not doing all these sort of fancy moves and runs.
Yeah, like
but
overusing vibrato. And
she's not doing any of that. It's just clear, concise, crispy notes, and it's just so satisfying to listen to We Are Broken. It's probably one of my favorite songs on the album for that reason.
Gotcha.
And then I also wrote, the response echoes in Born for This, so unifying. It really helps kind of hype the whole thing up. I think the reason that the echoes in Born for This are so unifying is because the guys' voices are so unified, and I think it's very effective. You don't have this sort of weird, like, everybody's talking at once. It's just very unison, and it's effective unison, and I think it was probably harder than we realized to make it sound unison, because it's really more talking than it is singing back. It's a shout back, and I think that's probably harder to get everybody in unison shouting than it is when you've got like a nice pretty melody that everybody's learned. It's easier to get people to sing pretty soft things. So I think a shout in unison is pretty impressive. So 2 out of 2 for vocal ability for this album.
Yeah. I think kind of on that same note, haha, pun, I think kind of another thing with Born for This, I think vocally that's so good is you have that, it's a very strong contrast between Haley singing and then the male voices responding, the male bandmates responding. So I think that vocal contrast is really good as well. So, yeah.
Okay.
Our next category that we cover is production. So this covers things like the composition of the album, all of the musicality and instrumentation, vocal mixing. It's more than just the musician's ability, it's the production quality of the whole album. So we kind of put those together because not all albums are produced by a singer who also plays an instrument, nor is every album produced by musicians where everybody plays an instrument. So out of 2 possible points, I gave this 2 points out of 2 points. I was surprised. This is probably, I'm just being transparent here, this is probably where I am the weakest in evaluating this aspect of a musical album. My musical background is I'm originally a drummer, also have played guitar and other musical instruments that play notes versus just beats. But some instruments are harder for me to pinpoint while I'm listening to. Like a bass line has always been difficult for me, my ears to detect. So it's hard for me to accurately judge how each instrument is doing. Tori has a much better talent at hearing those things. That's one of her strengths and my weaknesses. So full disclosure there before I kind of get into this. I think the mixing of this album is so good. You can hear the instruments just as clearly as you can hear the vocals. That is something that I find so frustrating in listening to music.
Agreed.
When you can hear the vocals, but the music just sounds like a garbled mess.
Or the other way.
Or the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
You hear all of the instruments that are kind of muddled together and you can't even hear what the singer is singing. I think there's a lot of, with the amount of variety in the tracks, there's so much cohesion with all the instruments that are being played. You can hear the guitar solo and the drums and the vocals. You can hear the bass line. You can hear, after I just said how it's harder for me to hear that, but you can hear every instrument that's playing. And I think it's a lot of respect given to the rest of the band. It's not the Hayley Williams band, it's Paramore. So the guitar and the bass and the drums, which are being played by the other band members, are given just as much of the spotlight in the mixing of this album. One thing, as a drummer, I think the drums are so well integrated and utilized as part of the whole sound. And one example of that is the song Fences. The drums drive the sound of that song, and then the guitar solo picks up. and drives the sound. But the drums never stop. It's almost like it's a drum-heavy song where the drums really get to shine, and then the guitar solo comes in, and then the drums pick back up. And I just think that it's so rare to hear a song that allows the drummer to be kind of the star of the show. So it's almost like you don't hear anything, and it's such a good groove in that song too. Mm-hmm. And it's tough to play if you're a green drummer, but I love that song. It's almost like it's Zach Farrow's song, because he's in the spotlight for that song. And I think highlighting that is really rare, not just in some of the pop punk bands, but just especially in other genres. They've hardly even used drums anymore. It's mostly electronic.
MIDI drums, yeah.
Yeah. So I think I really appreciate that. Of course, the opening of Misery Business when she says hit that snare, that's just iconic.
Quit stealing all my notes.
It's just become iconic with Paramore. And then also just that's how the snare builds up in Misery Business, and it really drives that song home. I think overall and this kind of goes into the album flow, but the kind of the beats per minute pacing as you're listening to the album all the way through is just productionally done really well, so that your ears don't get tired of hearing the same thing, but it's not being given this drastic shift. It's not like I've listened to this really fast song and now I'm listening to, I've gone from 120 beats per minute to 50 beats per minute. So just in developing that is great. And of course, the band members of Paramore are so talented.
Right.
And, you have to remember that, in the music industry where we have so many studio musicians and sample tracks that are producing the sound, these individuals played every note you hear and every drum beat you hear on the album. So I think that a lot of credit has to be given to that. And it really makes the whole album shine.
Now, I do want to just put a little tag on note. There were other musicians that did play for the studio recordings.
Right.
But they were everything was written by Paramore. So it was more like, we just need extra sound to fill in.
Right.
So they did have other musicians during studio recording.
Right. They did have other musicians, but the members of Paramore, Josh Farrow, Zach Farrow, and Jeremy Davis, they played the instruments that you're hearing.
Right.
It's, they didn't hire an extra drummer that Zach Farrow then learned how to play like that for the touring, for the tour. Right. So by that I mean that the band Paramore, the band members of Paramore that play instruments, which Haley does not, if you're not familiar, but Josh Farrow, Zach Farrow, and Jeremy Davis, they played and wrote all of their respective instruments' music for this album.
Right.
And then in the studio, of course, they had, additional instruments and members needed as the song dictated. So 2 out of 2 points production for me.
Okay. I also gave it 2 out of 2. I think that, like you said, every single member of Paramore should be given the credit that they are due. I think it's very easy for people to look at Paramore and they think Hayley Williams and they stop there. And I don't think that's fair, because while Hayley Williams is the voice of the group, she's not the entire sound of the group. And there is so much talent and intricacy that is given to the music of Paramore that is to be admired, and I think to be praised, really. So one thing is that I love how Zach Farrow is constantly changing the percussion pattern in every song. He doesn't start on a pattern and keep it through the whole thing. And because of that, it makes this effective sectioning of each song that makes each song section feel super fresh and new. And so you don't feel halfway through the song like you're ready for the next thing. You're engaged the whole time. And I think that's because the percussion of every song really does sort of drive the momentum. So if the momentum gets stale, you as a listener, it's very easy for you to kind of like tune out what's happening. You're no longer engaged, but that doesn't happen in any of their songs on this album. He's constantly changing the percussion pattern to these new, fresh sort of things, but his transitions, flawless. Like absolutely flawless. You cannot hear. You have to be listening for it to hear the change. But each transition is so smooth. So kudos to Zach Farrow. He's an incredible drummer. The intro to Misery Business. I know you mentioned this. Hit that snare. But I like how they put this sort of effect on the front of that intro where it kind of sounds like it's coming through an old timey radio.
I love that.
I love that. And then she says, hit that snare, and it comes in full force. I think even if you are not a Paramore fan, if you hear that intro, you know what song is coming.
Right.
It's become iconic to that song and that album by extension. The guitar through the intro to Misery Business, I think that the guitar is the shining instrument in Misery Business. I think Josh Farrow is the one that drives the momentum in that song. The riff goes all the way through verse 1, and when the vocals lay on top of it, they don't match perfectly, but they flow together, and it's super cool. I just really like the way that those two things kind of layer with each other. But I also want to give a big shout out to Jeremy Davis. I think the bass is the hardest instrument to hear, unless you have an ear for it, like you mentioned. And I think the bass is so important to a song because it fills in a lot of sound that would, without a bass, a song would sound so empty.
Right.
And you wouldn't even notice it because the bass is designed to just sort of fill that gap, but it's not designed to lead, and it's just not the purpose of the instrument. However, if you listen to the pre-chorus of Crush, Crush, Crush.
That is so true.
Oh, the bass.
The bass is really good on that song.
I flippin' love it. That's part of the reason that Crush, Crush, Crush is like one of my top 3 songs on that album. And it's because Jeremy Davis on the bass kills it. He just kills it through that song. But especially in the pre-chorus, I think it's the time that you can hear him the clearest. And he's got these really sort of like distinct like bass riffs, and oh my gosh, it's just so good. I just can't tell you how much I love it, but it's probably my favorite musical moment in the whole album is that pre-chorus in Crush, Crush, Crush. I think, and it's because of that bass. Now, tweet me if I'm wrong with my next point. I did not hear one key change in this entire album. Why? Paramore can do it. They're talented enough to give us a key change or 2 in a song. And I recognized none. I listened for key changes. I could not hear one key change. If there's a key change in a song, it is so smoothly transitioned that I could not hear it. And I have a pretty good experience. Like, I have pretty good musical experience. And I feel like I can recognize key changes very well. So if they hid one, they did it very well because I could not hear any key change.
Is there a key change in Hallelujah?
Nope.
She just hits that really high note.
She just hits that high note. She deviates the melody, but it's not a key change. At least not that I recognized. Again, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I did not recognize any key change, and it surprised me because I know their ability is there to do it.
Right. That is surprising.
I'm surprised that they didn't.
Yeah, that's very surprising because in other albums, they make it's a great creative decision to have a key change. And so it is surprising that there isn't one.
Yeah. So that was my note. I didn't take a point away, but I was just kind of like, man, really? All these years I never realized. But no key change.
Yeah.
So 2 out of 2 points for production, though.
All right. So our next category is album flow / cohesion. We give 1 possible point to an album or music for this. Some things we kind of consider just overall, does the album flow well? You know, if you listen to it start to finish, not every artist is intentional about what song is first on the album, what song is last on the album, and how the songs in between are lined up. But the majority of artists, I think, are pretty specific about what songs flow, how the songs flow. Is there a theme of the album overall? Is there any redundancy or songs too repetitive, etc., etc.? So I gave this 0.5 point out of 1. I think I kind of made a note. It opens with For a Pessimist, I'm Pretty Optimistic, and it closes with Born for This. I think those are great bookends for this album. I think it does a great job of kind of setting up for what you're getting into for this album and then closing out with a really satisfying finale. I think Paramore's... I made a note. I was trying to keep track of this. The songs that are typically attributed to Paramore's quote-unquote sound in this time frame, of course, we mentioned before that Paramore's sound has changed over the years. They've kind of evolved and adapted. But is tracks 1, 2, and 4, 8, and 11, I think are pretty consistent. So that includes For a Pessimist, I'm Pretty Optimistic, Misery Business, That's What You Get, Crush, Crush, Crush.
And Born for This. The kind of songs in between, I kind of made a note that tracks 5, 6, and 7 kind of feel like one. It's kind of like a trilogy. The songs kind of float into each other and then drive you back into Crush, Crush, Crush. So I think that was kind of a really neat decision to make in that tracks 5, 6, and 7, kind of like I mentioned earlier, that it is easy on the ears to segue into each other and then drive you back into Crush, Crush, Crush to get you that really like classic Paramore sound, if you will. I do think that those, especially Misery Business and That's What You Get, I think those were like, I think every kid in the mid 2000s played that on Guitar Hero or Rock Band or whatever. Like those are just classic Paramore songs. And they are iconic, but I kind of had a question, are they a bit redundant? Do they kind of sound too similar to each other, even though that is kind of the iconic sound? I'm kind of biased because I enjoy this album. I'm kind of a fan of Paramore, but I did have to think critically, do they all sound too similar on the album? Would it be better to have kind of broken them up and spaced them out and released them on different albums? However, I think it's important to note that Paramore's subsequent albums don't have the same sound as this album. So I think it fits this album well to include similar sounding songs, but I would concede to the fact that it could be considered redundant. I didn't necessarily take points off for it, though. I did take off half a point because I know you're going to hate me for this, but oh no.
But We Are Broken is so out of place in my opinion. I think I think you could argue it doesn't. I think you could absolutely argue that We Are Broken is not in any way out of place because you need a song to listen to after a bad breakup in 10th grade and you don't have a date to prom anymore and you need to cry in your bathroom on the floor listening to We Are Broken. I get that it fits the era and it fits that, sad ballad, but I don't think it really fits this album. You kind of have two kinds of songs on this album that kind of fit the overall theme. You have this like angsty, giving a middle finger to people being angsty about love, Misery Business, things like that. And then you have, kind of this friendship theme, like we're bandmates, we're together, we're born for this, I've been waiting for a miracle. You have this kind of overarching theme that fits the album. And then you have We Are Broken, that to me seems like it's out of place. I think I'm not going to knock on the song. It's not one of my favorites, but that doesn't make it a bad song. So I'm not in any way gonna crap all over the song. But I think in the terms of album flow and cohesion, it doesn't meet the mark on that. So that's why I took half a point off. It's only half a point, Tori. You can't be too mad at me for it.
I'm just laughing. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to laugh at you.
But that's why I took, half a point away. I just think it doesn't fit. I think you could argue, but every teenager needs this kind of song. Like, well, put it on a different album. It just doesn't fit the overall theme of this one. But that, in a way, that's a little bit of personal opinion. But I think you could argue that it just doesn't fit the album.
Okay. So, I also only gave this half a point out of 1 for album flow and cohesion. Cohesion. I say it weird. I noticed that when I was editing a previous episode. I say the word cohesion weird. I think I have to fully agree with you that For a Pessimist, I'm Pretty Optimistic, and Born for This are perfect bookends. Perfect bookends. You start and end with the same energy, which I think is really important, because I think a lot of albums end on sad songs. And I don't like that.
I don't either.
I want the sad songs to be in the middle, because I want to come out of the sad by the end. You know what I mean?
That's true. So put We Are Broken in the middle, because it's a sad song.
It is in the middle, kind of. Well, anyway. So, but I do want to address that note. I think We Are Broken fits the album, but I do agree it does not fit where it's placed. I think it would do better right after Misery Business. Hot take, maybe. But I think if you... And I know that would put two slow songs together. It would put We Are Broken, and then it would go into When It Rains. But I think those songs have a similar theme. And so I think the flow would be... And then you get through kind of that sadness faster. And then you kind of ramp back up through When It Rains, through Let the Flames Begin, through Miracle, back up to Crush, Crush, Crush. So you're ramping that energy back up. So you have this really hype. You dip down to a low, because I think sometimes, like... You think about Misery Business or whatever, it's kind of like a victory, even though things looked really, glum for me in my romance, but it turned out okay. But then I think sometimes on the back end, things are not always as they appear. And so I think something like We Are Broken could almost be poetic choice if it had been placed right there, and then just let the rest of the album flow as it does. So I agree. It does, where it's placed is poor, but I love the song, and I think it fits the album, but I think because of where it's placed, it's ineffective in the flow of the album.
I would concede that point. I think that perhaps if it was placed elsewhere, then I may not dislike the song as much, because it makes more logistical sense overall. But then, no, I'm just kidding. I would still not like the song.
Okay,
but it may fit the album better.
Okay. Well, my other notes are, so if you start with, For a Pessimist, I'm Pretty Optimistic, you get that hype energy, and it pulls momentum into the next three songs. So you carry that energy through, that's what you get through Hallelujah and through Misery Business. And then you do get a bit of a break, which I think is good, because you get 4 hype songs, and now you're tired. So you need a break, which is another reason I think We Are Broken could have been a good choice for number 4, but I'm not opposed to When It Rains as number 4, because it brings it down a little bit. You're like, okay, I can breathe for a minute. We get that break that we need. And then it sort of flows through. You get those breaks with When It Rains and We Are Broken, but I just think you don't really need the break after Crush, Crush, Crush in the same way. I do love how the end of Let the Flames Begin flows seamlessly into the start of Miracle, like musically. Like if you played them back to back, you almost can't tell that they're 2 different tracks. Sort of the way that like Broadway shows, like their albums really have to be listened to in order, because they do flow and they're designed to do that.
Right.
That sort of thing happens with Let the Flames Begin into Miracle, and I think that's cool. But the reason that I took half a point away is because I think they play this album too safe. And I sort of mentioned that earlier because I think it also applied to lyrically. But I think they do what they know and they do it well, but there's no risk. They take no risks in this album. There's no major sound shift anywhere. There's no like surprising instrumentation. It's all great instrumentation, but there's nothing unusual or like shocking that they try to pull off. I think they take more risks in later albums. They experiment a little bit more. So I think that it does feel redundant because of that in some way. And I agree with your point. I half agree with your point about that's what you get in Misery Business, having only one song separating them, and that's Hallelujah. And I think that they are great songs, and I think they are distinct, but not distinct enough to be that close. So I almost want to pull That's What You Get out from the beginning and throw it somewhere into the middle of the album. That would just be my personal preference. So that's why I took away half a point. I do want to make a small note, though, that I think the cover of this album is awesome.
Oh, yeah. I meant to mention that as well. One of the things that a little bullet point we kind of discuss in this section is, does the title / cover art fit the theme of the album? And this is one of those albums that it 1000% does. It completely fits. It's completely iconic. It's a perfect representation of not just the feel of this album in general, but of Paramore as a band and their sound.
And I think the word Riot is very visually evident in the cover of that album.
Yep.
So yeah, 0.5 out of 1 point for album flow and cohesion.
All right. So next category, second to last category. I think almost every ranking we do, this is the second to last category.
Yeah.
For personal taste and preference. So out of 2 possible points, I gave it 1.5 points out of 2. And the reason I did that was because of all the songs on this album, there are about 3 that I consistently skip. So out of 11 songs on the album, I enjoy about 75% of them. So I felt like that was a reasonable way to determine how many points I should give for personal taste and preference.
75% of the points.
So 75% of 2 points is 1.5. So I feel like that's kind of a good judge of kind of how I should rank it.
Which 3 are those?
Oh, let me look at the track list.
Can I guess them?
Yes, but let me pull up the track list real quick.
Okay.
I can't remember stuff off the top of my head. Okay.
Obviously, We Are Broken.
Yes, obviously.
When It Rains.
Yes.
And I'm going to take a stab and say the third one is Miracle.
No, I really like Miracle.
Okay.
It's one of my favorites off this album.
Okay.
But actually, and it's not that I dislike the song, I'm just hardly ever in the mood for it, but the third one I probably skip the most consistently is... Wait, what did you pick? You guessed We Are Broken.
And When It Rains.
And When It Rains. It's probably Let the Flames Begin. I really enjoy that song, but I'm just not always in the mood for it. It's probably either Let the Flames Begin and maybe Hallelujah. I kind of go back and forth between whether or not I want to listen to that song or not. So I just kind of, usually if either of those come up, I might skip them, but I might not. Probably about 50% of the time. So it kind of goes, so maybe there's 4, but 2 of them, I do enjoy listening to them about 75% of the time. So, but pretty much I always will skip We Are Broken and When It Rains. I'm just hardly ever in the mood for it. When I want to listen to Paramore, I want to listen to like the classic, like, fast-paced like Paramore. So I don't skip them because I think they're bad. I just don't typically care for them. I think that they're still very well-written songs. One of the things that I'm noted as far as personal taste goes is the older I get and the more I listen to this album, the more I enjoy it, which I think is really odd for this style of music, because I feel like as you age, this would be the kind of album you grow out of and don't want to listen to anymore. But I have the exact opposite. The more that I listen to this album, the more I enjoy it. And I think as an adult, that's a pretty big statement for how well this album is written and how well it's produced, and how much the songs can still resonate with you, even if you're not that angsty 16-year-old anymore. So 1.5 points out of 2. I don't love every song on this album, but I still very much enjoy it. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Paramore album, but I do enjoy it very consistently.
Okay. So for personal taste preference, I gave it 2 out of 2 points, as to be expected.
Yes, you did.
So for me and Holland talked about this, and if we wanted to include it in our music rankings, and we ultimately decided that it's something to be considered, but we don't have to use it in regards to our ranking, because we have very different opinions on this, and that's music videos. So music videos are very important to me. They always have been. I feel like music videos are a production choice. It's part of the art of the music, and I think it can be effective or it can detract from the song. As far as storytelling goes. So music videos have always been very important to me, and even music videos that don't necessarily have a narrative to them, but may have like cool visual effects or choreographies or something like that. Those are things that do affect my opinions of songs. I know for Holland, that's not the case. You hardly ever watch music videos, if I'm correct, and so you don't have as much weight in them as far as like personal opinion go.
Yeah, I do enjoy music videos. I appreciate the artistic decision making and the work that goes into them. And in discussing whether or not it should be included as part of our ranking, we didn't want to give it a category because if a music video is terrible, that shouldn't take away from the quality of the music itself.
Right.
On the contrast, if the music video is exceptional, if it broke ground in some way, it did something new and creative, then, it should be recognized as an accompanying aspect of the album, because a lot of times music videos are created and conceived by the artists or by the label, and we can argue all day of does the artist really have a say in this, that, or the other, or is it the label or the company or whatever. That's beside the point. So we decided that it is optional if you want to include that in your decision making. However, it should not outweigh the album itself.
Correct.
So Tori definitely includes the music videos in her decisions and in her specifically in her enjoyment. However, I did want to point out in the music video for Misery Business, they cut out the most iconic part of the whole song, which is that intro. Mm-mm. It starts with the snare beat,
right,
and then goes in.
It starts with the hit that snare, after that part,
right. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that one of the most iconic aspects of that song is not even in the music video. But
so that being said, that's just kind of a disclaimer before I go into my personal taste and preference. So I gave it 2 out of 2 points. I did write LOL, the music videos are all in 360p. Because they were made in 2007 and then put on the internet, and that's the best you had.
Yep.
So I thought that was funny.
That's pretty great. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
I did watch the music videos for this in researching this episode.
However, and I think maybe part of the reason that music videos are so important to me is my film background. So I think that may just be part of my personal bias as to why I enjoy them so much. But I do want to say that Crush Crush Crush's music video is one of my favorite Paramore music videos of all time. Like, their whole career, start to finish. Crush Crush Crush. I love that music video. They're in the desert, jamming to music. They start smashing all their instruments. They're all like freaking out. It's so good. It's so good. And I know it doesn't exactly match the narrative of the song. It doesn't match the narrative of the song, but it's still so good, and I love that music video. Plus, I think Haley looks so cool. I just want to be as cool as her in that music video. I am undecided if this is my favorite Paramore album, but it's definitely one of them. If this is not my favorite, then it is probably... I don't know. I feel like
You're choosing a favorite child over there.
Right. It might be tied with their self-titled album for me.
Really?
Yeah, which is an album that has a bitter history for me, but that has, it has become one of my favorites. You know what? I think Riot might be my favorite album.
Really?
I think it is. I think I love it just a little bit more than all their others.
'Cause All We Know Is Falling used to be your favorite album.
All We Know Is Falling is still up there too, but that's an album that I think hasn't aged as well.
That's valid.
So,
that's
yeah.
valid.
So, and there are more songs that I consistently skip on All We Know Is Falling than there are on Riot. Or any other album, actually. So, but my favorite Paramore song ever is on All We Know Is Falling. So I do have a ton of love for that album. So, but Riot was the album that bought my loyalty. And it was the first album of theirs I'd purchased. So I'd heard All We Know Is Falling and I had loved that album, but it was when Riot came out and I was like, I'm going to be a fan of this band. Like, 2 consistent albums. I love it. I went out and purchased it from Target, I think.
Yeah.
And then So I didn't get any of the bonus tracks. But I should have gone to Hot Topic, but I was afraid of Hot Topic when I was that age.
It was scary when we were kids.
When I was that age, I was scared because I would have wanted Decoy. But so 2 out of 2. I think Riot is an album that means a whole lot to me. If I think about it too hard, I get emotional, so I will not do that.
Okay, so that's a great segue into creativity. So this is I actually kind of touch on a little bit of what you've already said. Out of 1 possible point for creativity, I gave it a full point. And one of the things that we wanted to give credit to in the category of creativity is if a work was a milestone work or iconic. And I think that is absolutely the case with this album. I would dare to say that this album could be considered the album of a generation. I think that the fact that at the time of this recording, the song Good For You sampled
Yeah.
Misery Business from Paramore. And the reason maybe not the artists themselves, but the listeners attributed the success of that song to Paramore and how successful Misery Business was, and the fact that the sound of that song sampling from Paramore resonated with so many people because it was Paramore. And I think that in our generation specifically, this album came out at the perfect time. It came out right at the time of our generation's teenage years, teenagers who are wanting to find themselves and find their place and figure out what they want to stand for and who they want to be, and having a vision for their future at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, kind of that core high school age, or even some in middle school. I think that this album really is the album of that generation, and I think that even people that were not necessarily fans when it came out, they found resonance in that album as they got older. I personally was not a fan of Paramore when this album was released. I was kind of a late bloomer in the pop punk genre. I didn't really listen to that music until I got closer into college. So even as an adult listening to Paramore, I found resonance in their music. And technically that was my generation. Like, my adolescence would be when Paramore was starting to get their start. So I also wanted to kind of give credit as far as creativity goes to the fact that the music videos are pretty iconic. I don't particularly find them anything, groundbreaking, but they are very typical mid-2000s. Just very typical. And right when internet culture was getting started, music videos were available on the internet. They're pretty true to the time. And then, of course, also we already mentioned that the bonus tracks that you could get for this album varied by location. I went ahead and looked up where they were associated with.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So there are 5 bonus tracks associated with this album specifically, which some of these I didn't know. One album track is called Temporary. It was available on the Fueled by Ramen website as a bonus track if you got the album from there. Decoy was part of the deluxe edition of Riot. The song My Hero, which is actually a cover of the Foo Fighters song, was part of the Rhapsody release of this song. And then 2 songs, Stop This Song and Rewind, were part of the UK release. So if any of our international listeners are listening, you're actually probably more familiar with those songs than we are, because it wasn't part of that physical album. The one nitpick I do have with this album, it did not factor into my scoring system. The bonus tracks didn't factor into my scoring. The music videos didn't factor into my scoring, and this didn't as well. But, when I was growing up, CDs were what we had, and half the fun of the CD was pulling out the jacket and reading along to the lyrics while you're listening to the song. And I opened the album, and maybe I have a different version, so if you have a different version that isn't like this, you can correct me, but I opened the sheet to read the lyrics while I'm listening to this album to do the research for this show, and there are lyrics to 4 songs, and that's it. Mm-hmm. They don't have the lyrics for the entire album, and granted, it looks cool, and, it looks like it's a handwritten, lyric sheet that, one of the band members wrote, but still, I grew up with CD culture. Like, that's part of the point of buying a CD versus, you know,
that time you didn't go and Google the lyrics.
You really couldn't Google the lyrics. Well, I mean, you could, but it was tough to find access to lyrics otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, MP3 downloads were just getting started around this time, I guess, but iTunes was, you know, well established, but other alternatives. But it's like, come on, I want to read the lyrics while I'm listening to it, and I want to read the lyrics you wrote, because sometimes people post things online and it's not the right words. Mm-hmm. So I do have that little critique, but I understand that, you know, also it's not a book. It's one sheet that folds open, you know, so it's technically 4 panels front and back. So it, you know, maybe they were short on paper and they didn't have the money to print a whole book, but yeah, anyways, I do think this is such an iconic album that if nothing else was considered, just the fact that it has become the hallmark album of Paramore. When you think of Paramore, you think of Misery Business. I think that iconically it deserves full credit in the creativity category.
For creativity, I also gave it a full point. I think this was the album that brought Paramore from being an indie band to being a band of notoriety. And I think that was because of the popularity of That's What You Get and Misery Business. And yes, they also had Hallelujah and Crush as singles from this album. But I think that the two that everybody knows is That's What You Get and Misery Business. I think that this was the album that kind of solidified that Paramore was here to play the game, and they were pretty good at it. And I think that if Riot had not become as popular as it did, I'm not sure that the band would have continued, if I'm honest, because the popularity of their albums dipped again with their next album, Brand New Eyes. It wasn't until their self-titled album that they kind of rose back to that same level of notoriety. So I think that if they had just continued to be stagnant in that way at that plateau, I'm not sure that they would still be making music now. That's kind of I'm of course I can't know that for sure. They may have continued to make music for the love of it, but I think that it's probably encouraging to Paramore as a band that when Riot came out and they saw like people love this and they want more from us. So I think as an artist that would be very affirming, and I think it probably was for them as well. And so I think it kind of helped keep that momentum of their career going at that point, because they were still newbies, like rookies at that point.
Right.
And now you can look back and say at this point Paramore are veterans in that genre, and they are to be respected. And I think Riot was the album they had thrown their hat into the ring, and now they were not willing to take it back out. And I think this was the album that kind of gave that impression to the rest of the pop punk world. So
awesome.
So that makes your overall score.
So my overall score for Riot by Paramore is 8.5 out of 10.
And mine is 9 out of 10. It's my highest score so far.
Yeah.
But it's because I'm such a Paramore stan.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that, but like we said when we started this podcast, kind of the point of our system is that something can be your favorite and not necessarily be a high-ranking score, but something can be your favorite and be a high-ranking score, and you can advocate for why it deserves the score it does. And I think you did a good job of that. I think you advocated, qualities of the work itself that merit that score. So, I say that as a caveat because I don't want people to think that we're just going to give high points to things we like and low points to things we don't like.
True.
So,
yeah, because even if we don't like something, we need to be able to intelligently verbalize why.
Exactly.
Okay, so you ready for some lightning round?
Yeah, let's go into some lightning round.
Okay. All right, lightning round questions. So I'm just going to spit these out. We'll each answer. I'll ask you, and then you'll answer, and I'll answer.
Got it.
Okay, question number 1. Your favorite track on this album?
I think my favorite track on this album, consistently, is For a Pessimist, I'm Pretty Optimistic.
Okay, I think mine is Crush, Crush, Crush. It's very good. But that changes on it, kind of on what mood I'm in.
Same.
So these are today good answers. Okay, question number 2. Your least favorite track?
That We Are Broken. Already said it.
I think mine is probably Miracle. Not because I dislike it, but because I think it's just weak, and I mentioned that.
Yeah.
Okay, third question. Favorite music video from this album?
Probably Crush, Crush, Crush. I did watch I watched the music videos, and to be quite frank, I didn't really think any of them were anything exceptional. But Crush, Crush, Crush would be my favorite.
Okay, same for me. I mentioned that already. And then number 4, your favorite of the bonus tracks?
Decoy would be my favorite bonus track. Definitely. I think Decoy fits the album sound the best. It feels like it could be an organic part of the rest of the album. Like it could be just a 12-track album and it could fit. And so yeah, Decoy.
Okay. So I agree that Decoy fits the album the best, but it's not my favorite bonus track. My favorite bonus track is actually My Hero.
Is it really?
It really is. I don't know why.
My goodness.
I don't know why. It makes me feel like a teenager again. And it's like the good kind of nostalgia.
Oh gosh. I actually am glad they didn't put that album on that track on the album, because I can't stand that song.
Really?
I cannot stand it.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
I don't know if it's the way that Haley
it's a cover of a Foo
I
Fighters
know,
song.
and I don't like the song at all. And I don't know if I just dislike the way Haley Williams says the word ordinary in that song, or like, I don't know what it is about that song, but I have this distinct memory of my younger brother playing that song on repeat and me wishing that I could just wear earplugs because I just could not stand the songs. Maybe I just have a bad memory associated with it.
This is our first polarizing opinion
on Paramore's Riot
except
album.
for me, and well, maybe We Are Broken as well.
Probably.
Okay, question number 5. If you could choose any singer to cover a song from this album, who would you choose and what song would you want them to cover?
I gotta look at the track list again.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think I would really like to hear somebody very different from Paramore cover one of these songs in their own style. I think I would really like to hear Owl City cover Hallelujah. I think that he could do a really unique take on it.
Okay.
I think his voice would fit the kind of the lyric tone of that song. And then I think he would also put a really unique spin on it. So I think that's what I would say.
Okay. I want to hear Panic at the Disco do Fences.
I could see that.
I think it would fit them really well. Brendan Urie would do a great job at that song. But that was what when I hear that song, I think it sounds like a Panic at the Disco song.
Yeah.
Like it would just fit their band's color very well. So that was what I picked. Okay, question number 6. Do you have a favorite member of Paramore?
No, I don't think I do. I think that if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be either Haley Williams or Zach Farrow. And it's convenient because the two of them are currently members of Paramore. Mm-hmm. But no, I don't think I could necessarily pick between the two. I think that Haley is extremely talented. But I don't necessarily like her more than Zach Farrow, but I also don't think I really like Zach Farrow more than her. So maybe they would just tie for first place.
Mm-hmm. So I have a favorite member of Paramore, and he was not part of the band at the time that Riot came out, and it's Taylor York. I just think he's an incredible songwriter, and I just really love kind of his style of production once he joined the band. So obviously I love Haley Williams. I love all the members of Paramore. I think they're fantastic and really talented, but Taylor York is just an icon. Yeah. I really respect the work that he's done.
I also have to give props to Jeremy in Paramore because we saw them for a concert and he came out and greeted all the fans that were out waiting.
He was awesome.
And gave autographs. And so on a personal note, I mean, sorry Jeremy, you're not in the band anymore, so maybe you don't count, and you weren't in the band. Oh yes, he was in the band.
He was in the band
for Riot.
Yeah.
He was not in the band for
After Laughter.
Yeah. But he was in the band for Riot. I think that that just speaks to him as a person. And poor Josh Farrow doesn't get any love because he caused too much drama, but we'll talk about that another day.
Yeah, I like Josh Farrow, though. I think he's fine. But yeah, so, okay, great. So that's all of our questions.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We look forward to having you back on our next show. You can follow us on our social medias in the meantime. We have Twitter at Lion and Mouse Pod and Instagram at Lion and Mouse Podcast. Our website is lionandmousepodcast.com, all spelled out. You can also find our rules of engagement there and notes from each episode. We also have a suggestion box where you can drop us a line and tell us what you'd like us to review next. Until next time, be brave and stay clever.